Hi all. In this chapter there is mention of a workhouse. A very famous writer called Charles Dickens wrote about a lot of workhouses actually, but as you know, Oliver Twist is my favourite. And he starts off in a workhouse. So what I would like you to do this time is to read up about Oliver Twist and write me a little summary about who he is, what happened to him, and how his life ended up outside of the workhouse. Okay, we're on chapter 21. Here goes. They rode east through the waking city as the last wisps of fog peeled from the houses and dawn blazed across the sky, scattering the cobbles with gold. Tired-looking figures emerged from doorways, buttoning waistcoats and stretching stiff limbs. Some of them stopped to watch a poster boy plaster new signs to a wall, demanding the capture of the Wild Boy of London and the Fairground Feed, Clarissa Everett. The price on their heads had risen. Wild Boy curled up tighter in the carriage footwell. He didn't know where he was headed, and he didn't especially care. For now, he was happy to let Sir Oswald carry them to safety. Everything hurt. His shoulder, his side, his jaw, his teeth. Each time the carriage rattled over a pothole, it felt like someone was punching his head. Clarissa lay across the carriage seats, her coat draped over her like a blanket. The hooded man's attack had left a sunset of bruises across her face. Wild Boy kept thinking how close she'd come to death. Just seconds away, the squeeze of a hand. And for what? Dr. Griffin's journal sat beside him in the footwell. He knew there would be clues in it to help catch the killer, but he couldn't bring himself to look. He wanted a few minutes to close his eyes, to think about anything else, but it was impossible. His mind was now occupied by just one thing: what the killer had said at the doctor's house. "The machine what changes you," Wild Boy whispered. The hooded man had claimed the machine could make him normal, like everybody else. Could such a device really exist? The carriage shuddered to a stop. "We are here," Sir Oswald said as he swung from the driver's perch. "It is safe for now, but hurry." Wild Boy slid across the footwell and poked his head from the door. They'd arrived near the river, where a rickety wharf buzzed with the activity of a market. Grizzled watermen hauled barrels of brandy and crates of fish from decks to dock. They were much too busy to notice his carriage parked at the far side of the wharf. A gust of wind swished off the river, but that wasn't why Wild Boy shivered. He climbed from the carriage and stared at a dark building that rose beyond the wharf. It was a miserable building, abandoned and left to rot by the riverside. Every window was smashed, and crows perched like gargoyles on their crumbling ledges. For a moment, Wild Boy forgot all about being seen. He didn't even notice the racket of the market or the sewagey reek of the river. Right then, the only thing in his world was that building. A drum began to beat inside him. He whirled around and yelled at Sir Oswald, "Why did you bring us here?" A shadow fell across Sir Oswald's face. "The circus and showmen are camped in a warehouse on the other side of the wharf," he said. "This building is deserted. It seemed like a good place to hide." "Nah, you don't know what this place is." "I do, Master Wild, and I know how you must feel, but you cannot stay outside any longer. It is too dangerous." He was right. Wild Boy knew. They were lucky they'd not been noticed already. Part of him felt that he'd rather be caught than hide in there. But after all he'd been through, he couldn't just give up. He pulled his coat tighter around him and led the way to the dark building. Clarissa climbed from the carriage, watching curiously. Excuse me, sorry. "Sir Oswald," she said, "what is this place?" "My dear, that is the workhouse where Master Wild grew up." The workhouse. His workhouse. As he looked up at the ugly block of bricks, Wild Boy's inside twisted with dread. He leaned against the wall, trying to fight back the painful memories that flooded his mind. But it was no use. There were too many. This was the place where he'd been abandoned as a baby, where he'd spent 8 miserable years until Augustus Finch had taken him away. It was a coincidence, he knew. The fair had camped in a warehouse near the docks while they prepared for Bartholomew Fair in the city. But still, he felt as if the building had dragged him back to remind him of what he was, as if he could ever forget. He climbed through one of the broken windows and gazed around the empty brick shell. The building was derelict, but it hadn't been much more cheerful when he'd lived there. The same bare walls, the same bleak cold. Only the table had disappeared, and the stench of rotten food was now replaced by a powerful reek of damp and stale urine. Clarissa clambered inside and glanced anxiously around the room, as if she half expected someone to leap from the musty darkness. Seeing that they were alone, she looked at Wildboy and bit her lip. "Is it true," she asked softly, "that you lived here?" "This was the dining hall," Wildboy said, "where the other boys ate." "Not you, though." "Nah, not me." He walked out of the hall and up the stairs. With each creak in the floorboards, he remembered another beating from Master Bledlow. He could almost hear the chants of the other boys echoing around the mouldering walls. "Monster! Monster!" At the top of the stairs, the door still bore that mocking charcoal sign, "Wild Animal, Beware." He breathed in deeply, trying to fight the emotions that were overwhelming him. "Don't cry," he told himself. "Don't you dare cry." He'd spent 8 years here refusing to cry, never giving them the satisfaction, and he was desperate not to now. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Memories hit him like a punch to the stomach, knocking the breath from his body. He gripped the door as his legs buckled. "No," he gasped. "Please, don't." But he couldn't help it. He slumped to the floor as tears stung his eyes and soaked into the hairs on his face. He tried so hard not to feel sorry for himself, to always act tough. But there had been times in this room when he felt so lonely he'd thought he might die. He remembered sitting in the dark, listening to the other boys laughing, and how all he wanted in the world was a friend. But he'd known they were laughing at him. Every single person in this building had hated him because of how he looked, and now every person in the city did too. Something moved. He looked up, wiping tears and snot from his face. A crow sat on the window ledge, watching him through the broken glass with unblinking eyes. Its loud caw rang around the room like a shriek of laughter. Wildboy remembered how it seemed that even the birds used to mock his misery. The crow flapped away as Wildboy picked himself up and stepped to the window. Outside was still the same. A sliver of street in one direction, the river in the other, and the busy docks below. His view. The floorboards creaked. Wildboy turned, his hands tightening into fists. Suddenly he was that 8-year-old boy again, terrified of whoever came into his room. But it was only Sir Oswald, sitting in the doorway on the stumps of his missing legs. He removed his hat and smoothed back his salt and pepper hair, as if he was visiting a grieving widow. "I am so sorry, Master Wild," he said. "This was the only safe place I could think to keep you." "What happened to it?" Wildboy asked. Sir Oswald came closer, his upper body swinging between his arms. "I made some inquiries. The workhouse closed down over a year ago. The master in charge met with an accident." "Accident?" "He fell into the river, drowned." Wildboy turned. He hated Master Bledlow and had dreamed for 3 years of getting revenge on him. But he'd never wished him dead. He felt deflated, empty. "The other boys," Sir Oswald said, "were all mostly placed in families or on apprenticeships." "Lucky them," Wildboy muttered. He remembered all the visitors who had come to this room and how his heart had surged with the hope that they would take him away, but they never had. They had just paid Bledlow to see the freak. And then that night, the night the showman came, Wildboy had thought that, finally, he was embarking on some sort of new life, but nothing had really changed. The bullies had just got more dangerous. Master Wilde, Sir Oswald said, I am sure that you have nothing but dark memories of this place. But think of it like this. Without it, you would never have developed your skill. Skill? The way you see things. It's just looking, Sir Oswald. Well, then, no one else can look the way you do. It is a rare talent, Master Wilde, whether you accept it or not. You must use it to save yourself and Miss Everett. She tells me that the killer is still after some sort of machine, something to do with electricity. Wild Boy considered his reflection in the broken window, a monstrous mess of tangled hair, filth from the sewers, blood and dried preserving fluid. Even his eyes had lost their sparkle. Sir Oswald, he said, the killer said the machine could change a person, change how they look. Do you think that's true? Sir Oswald thought about this for a moment. I am hardly an expert on such matters, Master Wilde, but I once spoke with Professor Wollstonecraft about electricity. He told me that it was an extraordinary power, capable of incredible things. So, yes, perhaps it is possible. But I know this. You must keep going. Find this machine and perhaps you will find the killer. Do not give up now, Master Wilde. If you do, they have won. Mr. Finch, Master Bledlow, and all those boys who persecuted you here, they will have won. He shoved his hat back on his head. Now, speaking of Mr. Finch, I must return to the warehouse. Finch. Wild Boy had almost forgotten about him. It seemed strange that only a few days ago his biggest worry had been a beating from the showman. He felt sorry for Sir Oswald. Without a show, Finch would probably be drunk all day. I will return in an hour with food and clean clothes, Sir Oswald said. Promise me you will not go anywhere until I return. Wild Boy managed another slight smile. Where else am I going to go? The grin returned to Sir Oswald's wrinkled face. That's the spirit. Miss Everett has lit a fire downstairs, so I suggest you make yourself at home. Quite industrious, that young lady. I knew the two of you would make a fine team. Keep looking, Master Wilde. It is not over yet. Sir Oswald raised his hat in salute and left. Wild Boy turned back to the window. He knew Sir Oswald was right. He had learned his skill here, if it was a skill. Perhaps he could have saved himself and Clarissa. But what then? He'd still be a freak. Nothing would have changed. Unless it was true. The machine, what changes you? He whispered. Okay, so I want you to do some research about Oliver Twist and the workhouses. Thank you.